friends, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to teach you about Restful API with .NET Core. Also make sure that you subscribe my channel for more videos on .NET. Okay, let's move to the topic. Let's see what is this API. API used in order to get a request from the client to the server and send a response from the server to the client. This diagram may clearly explain you what is an API. Now let's see how API works. Let's take one real world example. Imagine you have a weather application on your smartphone that provides you with current weather information. The app doesn't generate this weather data itself. Instead, it relies on a third party weather service. The communication between the weather app and the weather service is facilitated through an API. Let's say we open a browser and we search for something. It is going to make a request. If we are searching like google.com, and it will send the request to the Google server. Let's see how HTTP works. That request sent by the client to the server contains three parts. They are verb, header, and the content of the request. And also, when we see the response part, it is also contain three parts like status code, headers of the response, and the content part of the response. The verb of the request part is to define the server to what the server has to do. Verb can be like post, get, put, patch, or delete. This get is to request a response from the server, and post is to insert resources, put is to modify resources, patch is to modify partial resources, delete is to remove resources. And then headers of the request. Header contains the information of the request. It contains the metadata of the resources of the request content. It includes content type such as it may be a text type, JSON type, etc. and the length of the request, and then authorization. It means who make the request, and accept type. It may be JSON type or XML, etc. And then the content. Content part is optional, and this content part includes the request content. It can be like XML, JSON object. If we are using HTTP GET, it don't have a content part. If it is a put or post, we pass the request object inside the content. So it has a content part. Now let's see what is response. Response also contain three parts. One is a status code, second one is headers, third one is content. Status code, we can define a status code in 5 different ways. The status codes from 100 to 199, it shows informational responses. Status code from 200 to 299, it shows successful responses. And code from 300 to 399, it shows direction messages. 400 to 499, it shows client error responses. And the status code from 500 to 599, it shows server error responses. And then the header part. Header in response contain metadata of the response. It contains the content, format of a response, the length of the content, and when it gets expires. And also it has the content of the response as well. This content part contains response content and response information. Now let's start how we create our API project practically. Open your Visual Studio and let's create a new project. Here I am using Visual Studio 2019 version. Here you will see ASP.NET Core Web Application. Select that one and click on Next button. Here give your project name. I will name it as Shopping Item API. From here you have to select a location, then click on Create. Then it will open one another dialog box. From here you have to select API and then click on Create. Here you will see on our right hand side we have Solution Explorer. Inside that we have Controllers folder. Inside this Controllers folder I am going to add a new controller, and inside common we have API controllers. So our new controller will be one API controller, which is an empty one. Click on add. Then I'm going to give a name for our API controller. Our controller name will be item API controller.cs file. These controllers are class files. Then click on add. Here our item API controller class derived from controller base class. And also here you will see API controller written inside square brackets, and it says that the controller we created is an API controller. API always returns some data and we need the model class to return. So right click on your main folder, which is shopping item API folder, and then we have to create a new folder and name this folder as models. Inside this models folder we have to create our items class. Right click on this models folder and then click add class. Class name will be items.cs. Then click on add. Now here is our items class. Inside that I will add some properties. Then here we have properties ID and item name, public, int ID, and then we have public, data type will be string, item name. write your item API controller file. Here we have to create an endpoint, and for that we have to use a public method I enumerable items and then get items. Here this items comes from our model items, and then it will return the list of items. Now I'm going to add some items. Here we have new items, item name and item ID properties. Our item ID will be 1 and item name bread. Then our second item ID equal to item name equal muffin. Now let's add our route. Here our route will be API slash and then item API. Here we are requesting item details, so it will be HTTP GET. Now let's run this one and see the output. It will open up your browser like this, and you have to copy your route path and paste it. Here you will see the items which we entered previously. Instead of hard coding like this, we can use API controller in this way as well. Here you will see we are directly using the model class, but instead of that we can use DTO or data transfer object. This DTO provides a wrapper between the entity or the database model. Inside the model folder, let's add a new folder which is called as DTO. Inside that DTO folder, we create a new class file, and I will name this class file as items DTO. Then this in this items DTO class file also we include the properties that we included in the items class file. Here instead of using these items, I'm going to return items DTO. Here you will see an error. For that you have to import using shopping item API models DTO. Here also I'm changing items as items DTO. Now we should have a place to store all our item details. Instead of giving the item list inside our API controller, let's create a new folder inside our main project. And then I will name this folder as data. Inside our data folder, I'm going to create item store class file. I will name this class file as item store. Then click on add. Inside this item store class file, we add our item list. Now you have to cut the item list we entered inside the API controller file and just paste it inside item store CS file. Method will be public, static, then list, and it comes from items DTO, and return items list. Then you have to paste the copied part from the API controller. Import the namespace using shopping items API models DTO. Now go inside your items API controller. Now let's complete our return statement inside items API controller. Here we have to access items store and we return items list. We have to import the namespace using shopping item from data file. Now let's run and see the output. Paste your root path here and then press enter. Here you will see it returns our items list. Now see this endpoint, which is HTTP GET. Give the list of items we have. Let's see how to get items based on the item ID. Let's create another endpoint. It will be HTTP GET because we are going to request some data according to their item ID. Then method will be public. Here we use items DTO class and get item by ID. Here we have to pass the parameters which is int ID. Then let's write the return statement. Return items store dot items list. Here, in order to filter items by ID, we use first or default. And here we get data of first ID, and we are using links here. It will return the items where ID equals the ID which we passed in our parameters. In our second endpoint, we have to pass our parameter ID. So in the HTTP GET method also, we have to pass our parameter ID. Here inside curly brackets, we have to write ID colon and ID type is int. Now let's run and see the output. Here you have to change your request URL ID equal 1. Here it will return the details related to item number 1. Similar way, we can change it for item number 2 as well. Let's see how to define the status codes for these endpoints. First I'm going to select this endpoint, and here I'm going to use the keyword action result. Public action result. Here we will return enumerable of items DTO, put angle brackets. Assume that if everything is fine, we want to return OK status code, which means status code 200. And then here we have to return OK, and we pass the parameters item list inside brackets. Here I will do the same thing for our second endpoint as well, but here I will do some validation. Put the action result keyword. Then angle brackets. Now let's say if ID equals 0, we need to return it as a bad request. And then going to create one variable name item, and here we store requesting item by ID. I'm cutting the same thing and paste it here. And then again I'm check for if the item equal null, we need to return not found. So finally, if everything is okay, we have to return OK status and it will show up the item details. Let's run and see the output. Now let's run our request URL on Postman. You have to copy your request URL and open Postman tool. Then paste here. It is a get request and send. Now first let's check ID equal 0 instance. Send the request. Here you will see it is showing bad request. Then if ID equals 1, then send the request. It is giving the item details. When an instance ID equals 3, we have only ID 1 and ID 2. So let's see what will happen. It is showing 404 error. It means not found. That's what I told here. Up to now I showed you how to request item details. Now let's see how to add new items or create new items. For that we have to use HTTP post. Okay, method will be public. Here also we use the action result keyword. And it will use items DTO. Method name will be add items. Inside brackets we have to pass item DTO object. Here the object that we receive is from body, so we have to add from body attributes here. Okay, now I am going to add one if statement. If item DTO equal null, it will return bad request. And then if item DTO dot ID is greater than 0, At the time of creating, the item ID will be 0. So if it is greater than 0, it will be an error. And it should show the error internal server error. And the error code is 500. Here we will return status code 500. Here we have only two items at this time, item 1 and item 2. So here we get the maximum item ID and it will be incremented by 1 and it will be assigned to item DTO. Items store dot items list order by descending u equal u dot id. Then first or default dot id plus 1. And then this item object will be added into our item store. Items store dot items list add items DTO. When it is done, finally we return OK status and here we pass the created item DTO. Now let's run this one and see the output. Let's copy this request URL and paste on Postman tool. Now we are going to test post request. So select post from here. Previously also I told you at the time of creating items, the item ID will be 0. When it is added to our item list, it will be incremented by 1. So here new item name will be cake. Let's send the request. Here you will see the item is added. ID number 3, name is cake. Now let's try this statement. At the time ID greater than 0. Let's apply ID equal 4 and send the request. Here it says error 500 internal server error. Here you can see we have 3 item IDs now, but the item number 3 is temporarily added because yet we don't have a database. Now see, let's see if we try to enter some data with a null value for name. Let's send the request. Here you will see the data has entered into our item list, but the name is a null value. In order to avoid from this one, we have to use validations for name field. Let's see how to do this. Go inside your items DTO class file. Here we have name field. Here we have to use data annotations. I'm using required data annotation. Here you will see an error. See the solutions here. We have to import library using system component module data annotations. Fine. Now I'm going to add a maximum character length. Max length. Our max length will be 50. If we entered more than 50 characters, it will give an error. See the solutions here. We have to import library using system component module data annotations. Fine. Now I'm going to add a maximum character length. Max length. Our max length will be 50. If we entered more than 50 characters, it will give an error. Now let's see how the output works. Now let's try to send a request with the null value for name field. Send a request. Here you will see the name field is required, error is given. It is not added to the item list. See, we have bread inside our item list already. Let's see, again I'm going to insert bread. Send the request. Okay. Again we added breads as our item 3. So I want to omit this problem because we cannot have two items with same name. So let's see how to do this one. Let's add validations in order to check whether that the item name exists. So here I am going to add one if statement. If our item store dot items list dot first or default, and we check for the name here. And we convert this name into lowercase. So we add two lower keywords. Equal item DTO dot name dot to lower, and then we check whether the first or default is not null. Then let's see how to add an error message which need to be displayed when the item name is not unique. For that, here we have to use module state. Dot add module error. Here we have two parameters. This will be a custom error message. I will give it as error. Item name is not unique. And then we return. It will be a bad request. We pass the module state here. Now let's run and see the output. Now let's try to add item bread into our item list. Here you will see the error message is shown. Item name is not unique. Okay, now you show that it is working fine. Now let's see how to delete items from our item list. For that we have to use HTTP delete. Always we delete items by their ID. So here we have to pass our item ID. So inside brackets I am going to pass ID, which will be type int. Then method name public, name will be delete items. Here our return type will be iActionResult, and we pass the parameters int ID. Here we have one if condition. We need to check whether our ID equals 0. If our ID equals 0, we need to return it as a bad request. If the item ID is not equal to 0, we use the first or default item ID and it will be assigned to the variable item. This variable item is the item ID which need to be deleted. Item store dot item list dot first or default then u equal u dot id equal id, and inside this is if statement we say that if the item equals null, it will return not found. Then if the item ID is present, we use item store dot item list dot then the item will be removed. Here we pass the item which need to be removed. And then finally we return OK status. Now let's run and see the output. First, let's add one item into our list. I'm going to add cookies into our list. Okay. Let's see how many items we have. We have 3 items: bread, muffin and cookies. Now let's see how to delete. Here we want to delete our third item. Send the request. Here you will see it's ran successfully. Now let's try to get our item list. Now it contains only 2 items. Item 3 deleted. Let's see how to update our item list. For that we have to use HTTP put or HTTP patch. Here I am going to use HTTP put. This HTTP put consumes our item ID, so that here we have to pass item ID. Okay. Then public method, here we pass iAction result. Method name will be update items. Here we look from the parameter ID while updating. From body we get item DTO. And then I'm going to add if statement. If our item DTO equal null or ID not equal item DTO ID. So here we will return bad request. And then as similar to previous, we have variable items, and here we retrieve item data from item ID. We have item store dot item list, and first of default then u equal u dot id, and this id equal id where we pass the parameters here. Here we want to update items name equal items DTO dot name, and finally if everything is okay, it will return no content, or we can use it will return okay as well. Now let's run and see the output. See, here we have 3 items now. Now I'm going to edit the item which shown by ID number 3. For that, here we have to use put, and then I want to use item ID 3. Our item ID 3 is cookies. I'm going to change it as cakes. Send the request. Here you will get the status 204 no content. Now let's request details of item number 3. Here you will see item number 3 has changed to cakes. Okay, let's see. We are requesting item number 3, but here I'm going to update item number 2. Let's see what happened. It will be shown as a bad request. This is the end of today's video. If you are just starting your journey into the world of programming and eager to learn fundamentals, then welcome to my channel. Please subscribe my channel. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.